Welcome, everybody. Hi. Hi. So my name is Keisha Bwenge. I am the Senior Community Building Manager for this Open Contracting Partnership, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining our virtual report launch for A Procurement Path to Equity, Strategies for Government and the Business Ecosystem. I will be introducing the rest of the organizers and the panelists in just a minute, but first I wanted to welcome all of you and encourage you to, of course, keep introducing yourselves in the chat. We can already tell there's a lot of diversity of folks in the room. We're excited to have city government representatives, some business leaders and advocates, others from the philanthropic field and the wider ecosystem. And we really think this conversation will speak to each and every one of you, not only in what role each stakeholder group has to play, but also in how we can collaborate across sectors, across cities, and across different stages of the procurement cycle. As many of you may have seen, my colleague Kate will start sharing the link to the report so you can all start downloading it and diving in right after we hear from our amazing panel speakers today. So we're all here because we believe that good procurement is equitable procurement. And this recent spike in cases over the past few weeks adds even more urgency to this work. Not only is it about recovery, but it's about response right now. It's about how we cannot afford to wait if we want to keep small, minority, and women-owned businesses, as well as the neighborhoods around them, thriving. Because locally owned small businesses matter. They reduce inequality, they stimulate job creation, and they support social cohesion. All things that I think we can agree we need more than ever through this crisis. And in his powerful foreword to the report, Randall Woodfin, Mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, whose colleague Coriate is here with us today on the panel, emphasizes that small minority-owned businesses matter, and this is the time to make change and show up for them. For many of us working in this space, we know that solutions that advance equity also advance efficiency and transparency and value for money. So governments,
Right.
sorry, sorry. So governments have so many reasons to open up their procurement, use accessible and timely data, adopt user-friendly and outcomes-based contracting reforms, and engage vendors and residents to solve real problems on the ground right now. And there's a lot of opportunity here, with local governments in the US collectively spending $1.6 trillion, that is correct, $1.6 trillion per year on contracts. There's so much potential for procurement to be, honestly, absolutely transformative for our cities and states. But historically, and long before the pandemic, as we know, minority and women-owned small businesses have been locked out of opportunities to contract with governments. And of course, the current crisis has disproportionately impacted many of these very enterprises. And MWBEs across the board are rightfully worried about their ability to survive the economic downfall from COVID-19. In a poll completed this summer by the US Chamber of Commerce, 66% of MWBE respondents said that they are concerned about having to permanently close their businesses. But there is some hope. We have seen this year folks rally and organize. We have seen city leaders innovate. We have seen philanthropy step up to the plate, and we have seen small businesses support each other and their communities in unprecedented ways. This report builds on the work of those already making change on the ground. We turned to our community of procurement reformers and gathered insights from 35 experts working to improve our cities through equitable and open contracting. And we asked, how do we actually get there? What procurement reforms can really change the game for local governments that are trying to implement more inclusive policies? From setting goals for contracts awarded to minority-owned businesses to reducing barriers to entry through flexible requirements and many, many more things, as you can see in our solutions chart here. This is all in the report, so get excited. Open contracting reforms and strategies have so much to offer and can be a crucial step on the path to building fair and equitable cities. And lucky for us, we have brought 4 leaders working with city governments and small businesses into this conversation with us today. And they're going to provide their insights and help us take a deeper dive into how we can all collectively break down systemic barriers to economic inclusion for minority and women-owned businesses. A few bits of housekeeping before we start. We are recording the webinar and we'll send it to everybody once it's live. Also, we'll keep folks on mute, but please keep introducing yourselves, share your questions, share your thoughts throughout this conversation in the chat. Kay will be collecting your thoughts and leading the Q&A session in just a bit. Awesome. So, to introduce our moderators. Again, my name is Keisha Bwenge, Senior Community Building Manager at the Open Contracting Partnership. I'll be moderating the first half of this discussion and really getting into a conversation with our panelists. Kay, as I mentioned, will be moderating our Q&A session, and she's also author of the report. Thank you, Kay. And Jennifer Bradley from the Aspen Institute Center for Urban Innovation. They're our lead partner in this report. She's the founding director and will be closing us out. So last but not least, our lovely panelists. So we have Koryate Hauser joining us from the City of Birmingham. He is the Manager of Neighborhood Investment and Business Diversity. Elizabeth Reynoso, Associate Director of Public Sector Innovation from Living Cities. Jennifer Geiling is the Deputy Director of Policy and Partnerships at the Mayor's Office of Contract Services for the City of New York. And Carl Brown is the Executive Director of the DC Small Business Development Center. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to stop the screen share so that we can see all of our faces. So hello, welcome, welcome. So we have a question for all of you that we just kind of want to open up with. And we're wondering, what are your goals for open, accessible, and equitable contracting this coming year? Let's start with Koryate.
Well, good morning to some, good afternoon to others. But very simply put, I think the goal for us in the city of Birmingham is to do what is in our core value, which is be transparent and be accountable. We have core values here. We title them as CETA, customer service, efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. And I think the last two of transparency and accountability really work well for us when we talk about procurement, open and equitable procurement. And that's one of the things that we're really focused on for this upcoming year, is not only being accountable, but being transparent with where we spend our money, particularly with WMDBEs.
That's excellent. Thanks so much, Koryate. Elizabeth, what are you guys working on at Living Cities?
Yeah, well, we are interested in, one, obviously our own organizations work in our own procurement and how we use our dollars. We are a nonprofit national organization, but then we also work as a collaborative with philanthropy. So together we're looking at our own procurement dollars and where they're spent. But in particular with cities, I'm looking to ensure that lessons learned from the cities that are featured on this panel, as well as cities that we work on, their strategies can be shared with everybody, no matter whether you have a legal environment that where you can do race conscious programming or not.
Awesome, excellent. Jennifer.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to say thank you to Open Contracting and Aspen Institute for inviting the City of New York and the Mayor's Office of Contract Services to be part of this conversation, and for elevating procurement and procurement professionals. There's not enough of that. So thank you, and for bringing it into this context of MWBEs. The City of New York believes strongly that technology is a vehicle for inclusion and accessibility. And with that goal, we are pursuing digital contracting across the City of New York. We have been on that mission for several years now, and just had a major release of our online procurement system called Passport this past summer, which is enabling over $21 billion worth of annual purchasing every year across all of our industries, 41 city agencies, and includes about 30,000 vendors. So our hope for 21 is that we continue along this trajectory. Looking forward to releasing a fourth major enhancement of the system that will allow for online financial management as well.
Jennifer. That's awesome, and congratulations on launching Passport. I know that's been years in the making. And Carl, what are your plans?
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I want to first thank the Aspen Institute and Open Contracts for inviting us to be a part of this wonderful panel. What we're working on is working with the vendors that are actually going after your opportunities. So we're working with them to get their social economic certifications or get on 8A schedule or GSA schedule. We're working with them on their marketing collateral, their obviously all of the information they would need to be a good vendor and be a fit for your organization. So we're a little different, and I have a 30-year procurement background, so I know what you guys are looking for. So we are putting our vendors right on that path to success. Here in the District of Columbia, we're going to spend about $2 billion, and we're looking forward to our vendors getting a lion's share of that money.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing, giving us all a little bit of something to look forward to in the coming year, in addition to hopefully a vaccine. But this is all such important and vital work as we continue to deal with the pandemic. Elizabeth, so I wanted to ask you, the movement to include SMEs and MWBEs is not new. And with Living Cities, you're working with many different local governments across the country. And we're clearly in unprecedented times, but what do you think specifically makes this moment different? And why have certain barriers remained persistent? How are we going to overcome them now?
Yeah, love that question. Why this moment? Why now? And I'll share like what I'm hearing from all of the city procurement professionals that I work with, folks in racial equity offices too. They're saying that their work now, everything they've been working on to create more transparency and to create more accountability now has greater attention because it's not just their teams or their leaders that are asking for this, but it's their communities who have always been asking. And so now they feel that they don't only have to be the champions within their cities, but that because that their leaders are also being asked to as well. So I think that there is that, but in like many more local government folks are also folks who are coming from the community and like have seen the fact that this is the reason why they wanted to join and work specifically on procurement, because they saw the needs of their residents who are also business owners, who are also employers of many of their neighbors. And now they're seeing that there is more attention to this work and more will, and they don't want it to just be performative. It's not just like, let's support Black businesses. It's like, well, let's show the dollars. How do we do that? And so many of them have been doing disparity studies, or some of them, their own communities have been asking for it. So now they say, yes, so let's put some teeth behind this, not just do the disparity study, but actually put some policies and let's ask the community to hold us accountable. So we have folks in local government now that are coming from these communities. I have folks who have come from the business community. They're like, I got in here to try to change the system and I'm working within the city and there's so many legacy systems we have to change, but there is a way, there's a will. So I think that is also part of the change in this moment, so that there's like greater willingness to be accountable and beyond being performative. And also that I'm seeing that cities are saying, look at what we're doing. And we also have a role as a model or to learn from our eds and our meds, the anchor institutions as well. And so when a city like New Orleans does a disparity study and says, this is what it looks like for us, but then says, look at what the receipts are from the private sector, and it's less than 2% in a community like New Orleans, that means private sector, you got to step up. And so they've been able to make some strides there because the community asked for this data. And now they're saying, let's work with the private sector and let's see what kind of commitments they're willing to make.
That's incredible work. And Coriate, I know the city of Birmingham has similarly really brought the private sector on board to step up and make some of those commitments. You've been driving some of this political will and trailblazing some innovative measures to build an inclusive economy and explicitly make Birmingham a hub for women and minority-owned businesses before COVID. So building on that, what innovations or strategic commitments are you most excited about that you guys are running?
Yeah, by far, it's our program called VITAL. It's our inclusive procurement program. It stands for Valuing Inclusion to Accelerate and Lift. And so in that, it started with within City Hall. We needed to understand where our spend was, how we spent our dollars, where the opportunities lie. But we also understood that the private sector could play a role in community building as well. And so we extended that challenge, or the mayor extended the challenge to about 12 of our largest corporations here, Alabama Power, Blue Cross Blue Shield, of the likes. And so where their procurement dollar really matters in these neighborhoods and communities, you're talking billions of dollars that they spend within the community. And so they were able to sign on to this challenge to say, we're going to start with a baseline. We want the community to know that we're being transparent and we're being accountable to the community that we serve in. And so in January of 2021, we're excited to say that those companies who signed on we will be producing a spend report. That spend report is going to show where they're spending their dollars And most importantly, it's going to show the opportunities and development for those small businesses, WMDBEs, to be able to obtain those dollars in a very strategic way. And so while that's coming in January of 2021, that's not where the work ends. That work actually begins at that point. That is the very baseline that we are putting out for our community to say, hey, we're being transparent. Now hold us accountable to make sure that in 5 years that this number increases by whatever it may be. The beauty of Vital for us is that it's not prescriptive. Every company is not going to look the same. We do want some of those, sort of core values to be, entrenched through all of them. But the beauty of Vital is that each one of the companies will be able to tailor that report to how procurement works for them. Because it becomes an educational tool for small businesses to understand where those opportunities lie, where the coaching lies, where the development lies for small businesses within that. So that report is going to encompass the very first iteration of that. And we're excited to be able to partner with our private sector in that way. It's really never been done before. So obviously there's some challenges that come along with it, but we're hosting our very fourth conversation with these company CEOs and senior procurement professionals, because we're getting them ready for that transparency piece, which can be scary for a private sector. But thankfully, our CEOs in Birmingham has gracefully allowed us to really dig in and understand that their commitment to the community is way more than just putting a mission statement out that they're going to support small businesses, but we're putting action with this by saying, here's our dollar spent, and we're going to attach opportunities for coaching and development as well.
That is excellent. Yes, transparency being scary is definitely one of the major barriers that we see across government and the private sector. And it's great that you all are working to work past that, work through that alongside partners. Carl, I wanted to turn this to you. Koryata just mentioned the coaching opportunities for small businesses, an educational opportunity that comes with an initiative like this. You have been really on the front lines of supporting small businesses through the crisis. What are they looking for? What are the coaching opportunities that they seek that you've been able to provide, and the biggest challenges that MWBEs and SMEs are facing in this time?
Well, obviously, they're looking for different revenue streams, because if they were brick and mortar and they had to close, then they have to pivot and go somewhere else. And we've seen a lot of success and we've seen some failure. So we have to be mindful of that. But what we're trying to help them with is to understand how to get into this new market of online sales. It's just not, putting up a website, because you have to have content on your website, or else who's going to go and bother even trying to buy anything from you if they don't feel as though you can provide what they want, what they're actually looking for. Now, with just products, that's one thing, but a lot of our contractors are government service providers. So you have to tell the government what you do, what solutions you could bring to them, and what makes you different than your competition. And so we're working with them on that. We're working with them on their capability statements and their other marketing collateral as well. But we're also coaching them on doing videos, because that is a new way. People want to see you. They want to hear from you. So we're coaching them on videos, how to make a presentation. I mean, like I said before, I haven't worn a tie in a long time. So, it's all about presentation. And as a government contractor, you have to convince that buyer, that contract officer, that you can do that work. And if you can't do that, they're not going to mess with you, because there's risk. And no contract officer wants to be the one that brought on a company that totally failed. I've never met a contract officer yet that said, well, hey, I don't care. We are all, we want to make sure that our vendors are successful, and the city, state, or the federal government is successful in getting what they're paying for. Because ultimately, we have to respond to the citizens who are paying us this money through their tax dollars to get the job done right.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned earlier, you were a procurement officer. You do have all of this contracting experience. And yes, I'm sure you were not trying to be the person bringing on organizations that couldn't succeed now. But how has that experience enabled you to better support small businesses and work with local governments? Speaking of engaging with vendors, opening up data at the local level.
Well, and obviously knowing what I needed in each vendor has helped me to look at the vendors that are coming into us and they're saying, well, I want to go into government contracting, or they want to go get on GSA schedule or 8A. And then we evaluate where they are. And then federal government might not be the first step for you. Local government might be the first step. Then we try to identify the agency within the government on which one should you try and sell your services or your products to. Because I bought everything from ammunition for a police department to construction, so it's all different. If you're trying to sell me construction and all I'm worrying about is buying guns and police cars, we're not even talking the same language. And so you have to identify the people in which you're trying to sell your products and services to. And the federal government has what they call OSDBUs, which is the Office of Small Business Development Utilization. And you go in there and talk to them, and they know each and every procurement officer for that federal agency, and they can tell you who's buying what. And so you're not wasting folks' time, because time is very critical and very short right now. We're all working virtual.
Absolutely. That brings me to you, Jennifer. Speaking of helping save vendors time and helping save government time, as you mentioned, you all have launched the new passport system, e-procurement system, and also New York City has really driven some efforts to make sure that government performance is matching what is expected of vendors. And 80% of health and human services contracts were ready for registration on time. And one of our game-changing solutions in the report is making sure that vendors are paid on time. So honestly, how did you do it? In the largest city in the US, no less.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we're very proud of the work that we've done with our nonprofit partners over the past few years. I think it's attributed to a strong working relationship with the sector. And the commitment by the administration really across the board, whether it be OMB, whether it be City Hall, us at MOX, our agencies, really committed to strengthening that relationship. There are three primary drivers, I would say, to realize impact and change in this space. Again, it's establishing those channels for communication. So in the human service space, we have something called the Nonprofit Resiliency Committee. We have another set of conversations around some of the work that we're doing with budgeting and invoicing. And we have another set of conversations happening inside of MOX with our nonprofit partners for the development and deployment of passports. So it's having those channels where you're really listening. Folks are coming in and sharing their experiences on the ground, their challenges. We as a city are listening to them. And then we're working to try to make change. And that's the second piece of the puzzle, which is putting our customers at the center of design. And for us at the Mayor's Office of Contract Services and the city at large, it's really the businesses that we work with, our vendors. Our vendors are number one priority for us at MOX. And so bringing them into the conversations, listening, and then including them in the design and the reforms that are being developed, and bringing our agencies who are, right there after our vendors. Our agencies are actually our customers too at MOX. So they too need to be part of the conversation. We need to have good ideas, fresh ideas. We need to have solutions that actually work on the ground, work inside of businesses, work inside of agencies. And that is all what you need for buy-in, right? Everybody's got to be in, everybody's got to stack hands. Otherwise, implementation just falls to pieces, and there's a lack of understanding for the reforms. And finally, in the city, we, again, lean really heavily into technology. We have for years now. We had still do have a digital platform for human service contracting. It covers pieces of the contracting process, not the whole thing. Passport is covering the entire process. It is a welcome relief for the sector. There was a lack of visibility, as we all have been talking about here, that creates a lot of frustration and limits the amount of agency one has in their business practices if you can't see what's going on and what the next steps are. How can you plan for it? How can you report on it? How can you grow as a business? So we lean really heavily into technology and not just taking these offline practices and putting them online, but working with our vendors, working with our nonprofits, working with our agencies to deconstruct the practice, identify what is significant, and rebuild it in a way that makes sense, that is streamlined, efficient, and very, very easy for anyone, whether it's a large business that's been contracting with the city for years, or a new one that's just interested in growing and expanding its portfolio. Any type of business can jump right in, feel supported, and find success.
That's awesome. And hearing the way that you all are driving collaboration is also really impressive within agencies and, you know, sort of creating an enabling environment with vendors and with communities as well. And Elizabeth, this makes me think a bit of the City Accelerator program. I think you guys work really across the board. And we're just wondering what has been the key to supporting local governments to plan and implement procurement strategies? And behavior change is such a huge part of this. How do you make sure that all of that is sustained? How do you make sure people want to continue to collaborate?
Yeah, another great question. And, you know, Jennifer spoke to this a bit in terms of like, it's the relationships and partnerships. Coriolis said the same thing, Carl too. It really is when our work is supporting cities to explore their relationships with entrepreneurs and why they believe what they believe about entrepreneurs of color in particular. Because many times cities will put together programs that they've heard from somewhere else or they think is what the entrepreneur business owner needs, and it is not at all what it is, what they need. And it's not for lack of trying. It's just sometimes it's at a different level. You know, they're not addressing the needs of the business owner who's been around providing jobs and wants to take their business to the next level and wants to know about what, you know, can you tell us, city, like, what are your buying plans and like, are you forecasting so that maybe we could change our business model to address that? But no, sometimes it's just like, oh, come to this 101 level type of training and how to, you know, fill out an RFP and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, yeah, we've tried that. And what we're asking you for is to give us some kind of forecast and help. So really working with cities to help them explore what their relationship has been like with entrepreneurs of color in particular. And then to really be honest about whether they're the right messengers or supporters or technical assistance folks, because many times cities try to take on too much and realize like maybe their best role is to be the convener. Maybe their best role is to share data that they're collecting from everyone that they're working with. Just those two things alone can be such a game changer. So I'll take the example of like the city of Charlotte was in our City Accelerator, and they heard that the city of Los Angeles was thinking about their Olympics and how they were going to prepare vendors to be able to be ready for that. And they're like, wow, that is like, you know, long-term thinking. That's great. And they're like, wait a minute, we just got a request from the All-Star NBA, and they're saying they want to look for vendors, but like, you know, we're procuring from different types of service, you know, different types of businesses. But we also know these vendors too that could provide those services to the All-Stars. So they were just like, we thought like, wait, we have these relationships too. We could be opening these up. Instead of being gatekeepers for this type of thing. So how can we now do this? But wait a minute, we're not good at providing like capacity building to be able to, you know, provide goods or services to the NBA. Well, that's like, wait a minute, like Enterprise, this national organization does that really well. Why don't we partner with them? So it's just changing like some of the mindset about like how you are using your resources, what relationships you have, and thinking about what could folks, entrepreneurs of color who don't have these connections need that we might have access to. And then that data, just like sharing the data that they feel like, oh, everybody should know this. No, not everybody knows this. Maybe the vendors who've always been contracting with you know this type of information, but that's exactly what we're trying to change. you know, who has always been contracting with you. And so it's been wonderful to work with cities that are looking like, wait, we should be thinking about debundling our contracts because we do want new entrants into this. And yes, it's going to be harder. So yes, it means we're going to have to support our departments to understand what it's like to make smaller contracts, to meet new vendors and all that. So when we are able to work with cities that are realizing that they have this role and that they have been playing one for a while that might have been creating barriers themselves, that they've been asking entrepreneurs to like jump over hoops that are unnecessary, then they're like, then they say like, wait, why are we doing this? This doesn't meet our values and this doesn't meet our bottom line. So why are we doing this? And so when we can play that role of helping them ask themselves those questions and they know the answers, they have the solutions, it's kind of giving them the kind of cover to say like, you can do this. That's something that I love that we can offer support in when we have cohorts of cities trying things that they haven't done before, because they can say, well, they kind of asked us to try this out.
Yeah.
Hey, this other city is doing it. We're not going to be the first, and it seemed to work for them. So sometimes that's the best way that we can support other cities.
Absolutely.
Can I piggyback on that?
Go ahead, Carl. Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, she's speaking my language right there. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when I was a contract officer, I was the one that was trying to help these guys that were, you know, almost there, but just couldn't make it. And a lot of times they would ask me, well, what would, you know, in a debrief, they would say, well, what was it about our proposal that we didn't make it? And I would, you know, be honest and frank with them. And I would hold up, a lot of times it was pricing or technical skills. And I would hold up a Magnum magic marker in a rapidograph. A rapidograph is something that the architect draws the little trees with. And the Magnum marker is something that people write on the New York City trains with. And I would say, when you use a Magnum marker, we're not going to buy anything from you. You have to know your pricing. You have to know how to get into that competitive range and how to deal with your pricing like that. And also if there's any technical issues. And so what I would do is I would bring in the Small Business Development Center in Washington or Maryland or Virginia, because I'm in the DMV, and I would have them as a partner, and I would send them clients all the time. And that's how I became familiar with the one at Howard. Even though I'm a graduate of Howard, I didn't even know they were there at the time. And, you know, and then eventually took over as the executive director. But we do this every single day. We work with businesses on their business plan, their marketing plan, their financial projections. We do no cost confidential counseling, free. We do hundreds of webinars. We do loan package review. We've gotten over $9 million in like 5 months for these vendors with the PPP and the idle loans. We do industry research, because a lot of times they're trying to open up a hamburger joint next to a hamburger joint. I'm like, that's not a good idea, you know? And so all of these things matter, you know? We do international trade. And then right now we're doing a lot of cybersecurity, because how many times have any of you swiped this week? I mean, we're mostly staying home right now, but before we would swipe at the grocery, at the cleaners, at the convenience store, the movie theater, everywhere. Well, if they targeting people like Target and all your major banks, and those folks have IT departments with 6-figure and 7-figure salaries, what does their corner store have? You know, what does their IT department look like? And we're swiping in there like this is nobody's business. So we're looking at this, you know, cybersecurity as a major thing. And in the federal market, you have the cybersecurity maturity model certification that's coming up, that if you are a federal contractor and you're not compliant, guess what? You're no longer a federal contractor. Wow. So we're teaching our businesses how to become compliant in that space.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carl. So we are headed into our Q&A in just a minute, but I did want to also ask, As we mentioned, Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin has written a foreword for this report. I hope you all really get a chance to read it. It's incredible. But in it, he states that procurement is a starting point for pushing toward economic justice. And we think that's such an important way of seeing this work. And we're wondering, Coriate, if you can tell us more about how that translates. How does procurement become a tool for economic justice for you all? And how does that reconcile with some of the budget cuts affecting cities across the country?
Yeah, loaded question, but it's very important and very obtainable. I think just to give a little context, we're obviously in Birmingham, Alabama, the home of the civil rights, and so we have a history that is like none other. That history provides challenges, it provides wisdom, and it also provides opportunities as well. And so what we have seen as we've been more intentional in this work is that there are organizations, there are companies that will not identify as a WMDBE based on our history because that has been exclusionary for them. So what we're having to do is collaborate heavily with our community partners, ecosystem partners, to tell the other side of that story and say, if the city of Birmingham pulls information on diverse spend, we may not get information because there's no one on the other side actually telling us who they are.
Right.
That's, it's the nature of where we are in Birmingham and the history of that. And so I think that statement that there's race equity that can happen based on procurement is folded in this way. We have an organization or company that gets a city contract, let's say for $50,000. That's their entry into city contracting. As they get those contracts, they stay involved. They are with organization like Carl's, and they understand how to develop. In the next 5 years, they get $150,000. In the next 5 years, they get $1 million contract. So the longevity of making sure that that continuum is there makes a better case for race equity, because then it affects their family, it affects their quality of life, it affects their neighborhood. And then they're able to go back and not only teach their family, but now if they have children, there's generational teaching there. And then the neighborhood then becomes involved in that. And so where that small business may have been micro business in the beginning, it has now increased to small business and maybe mid-sized in the next 10 to 15 years. And so making sure that we understand what that continuum is and where government plays a role in that. And I think, Keisha, you said, we act as conveners, and that's really what it is. We cannot do this without our ecosystem partners. We have taxpayer dollars, so we are accountable to our citizens, absolutely. But the way that different governments, different municipalities have different tax structures and how money is spent. And so I think for small businesses to understand how that works, it becomes very important. And again, Carl and others on the call, their organization help you understand that. We as government don't always have time to help you understand that. We can put the opportunity in front of you, but we don't always have time to do that. One of the challenges that we have here in Birmingham is the Alabama bid law. So imagine Birmingham being the home of civil rights. You can imagine the policies, laws, procedures that are exclusionary just by nature because of where we come from. What we're trying to do now in this current administration is turn those over, not just by policy, but in practice as well. And so one of the things that Mayor Woodfin did was created the Office of Business Diversity and Opportunity. That office is solely focused on making sure that small businesses and WMDB businesses are supported throughout government. How do we procure with the city? What are city government operations? We just got online business processes last year. So imagine going from paper to online. It sounds like, wow, I can't believe that in 21st century, like you're just doing that. But the data gaps that presents for us to really understand where our businesses are, where we're spending money is very real. And so we've been able to be very intentional in how we approach that. And I think that large continuum of making sure that in government and operations of the government, we increase efficiency, increase effectiveness. Then on the other side of that, when we procure with these different vendors as they come in, we also partner them with vendors who can help them develop and get larger contracts. Those three key items really matter. And I think Mayor Woodfin was spot on with that statement to say that that procurement practice, that totality of procurement practice will absolutely help us to increase race equity in Birmingham and really all over. But that is more so important here in Birmingham and Alabama because of the just bruised history that we have around race equity. And so some of our conversations have to be a little bit more sensitive than others. But the thing that I really love about Birmingham now is that not only is there national attention around Black businesses, WMDBEs, but there's local attention for people to be honest. That has not happened before. I mean, I've had several conversations with my colleagues who do not look like me and say, we need to talk. I am a, white male. I thought I understood it, but I do not. Let's have a conversation. That open, honest conversation opens the door for so much to happen, whether it's education or policy change. Either one of those are going to matter in the long run. So a lot of our companies are taking the approach to say, I'm going to change some policies. I'm going to change some procedures. If they don't do that, that's fine. At least they have opened their mind in order to start thinking. Then we get the community involved to say, let's be accountable, because now that we've done that, let's be open and honest with our dialogue so that we can get a little further in our procurement practices.
That is amazing. I feel like you touched transparency, accountability, honesty, collaboration, all of which are so, so important for moving the needle on any of this work. And yeah, thank you all again for answering our questions. I think we're ready to move on to the Q&A section and make sure that some of our participant questions can get fielded to you guys. So Kay, please take it over.
Hello, thank you to everyone who has already been leaving some great questions into the chat. We're going to try to get to as many as we can, so keep them coming. But to kick it off, we have a great question from one of our participants who asked what advice you might have for less capacitated or legacy cities to start intentionally thinking about inclusive procurement and better supporting MWBEs. We would love to hear any concrete steps that these cities should take.
I'll take first stab.
Perfect.
I think very concrete things that the city can take is really understanding its spend. Have you ever produced a spend report to understand where you're spending your money, right? I mean, it's like all of us personally. If we swipe our debit cards and we never look at our accounts, we don't know where we're spending our money. So at the end of the month, you're like, whoa, I didn't realize I spent that much money on food or entertainment. So I think really understanding and getting to the core of where the money is spent. Sometimes that's very easy. In our case, it was very hard. There was decentralized procurement that we had. So we had to go through multiple agencies to try to understand that. But that gave us a baseline to say, we thought we knew what we were doing, but we really didn't. But now that we have a baseline, we have somewhere to move forward. So I would say first steps in that is actually produce I shouldn't say produce a spend report, but actively work on producing a spend report. And that's going to give you, I think, a good basis on whether or not you have the systems and practices in place in order to even understand where the dollar is being spent in procurement.
Yeah, I would echo that. You have to know what your starting line is in order to set your goals and to understand where the gaps are and the disparities are. And I would add to that another a concrete piece is actually looking at your policies and your practices that are in place in light of that information. And there was another question in the chat that caught my eye around this topic in particular, which is the intersection between policy and practice and technology. So technology is critical for accessibility. Everybody knows that today more than ever with COVID. We're all, dialing in and here together because of technology and being in a remote space. And so I'd say in the city of New York, we've invested a lot of time and effort in building up policies, practices, taking them apart as well. and thinking about the implementation in connection with technology. So I'll give you a concrete example. The City of New York in early January adopted a new policy where expedited procurement is available to our city agencies who are doing business with MWBEs. If you are pursuing a procurement of $500,000 or less, you can do it through a non-competitive method that allows you to do business with MWBEs. But that method is only available through Passport. Passport's our technology procurement system. It existed before Passport went live with its major release, but with the increase up to $500,000 and the addition of new goals, so building on that baseline, then you start to establish your goals. Passport is brought into play, and it can be a lever for reaching the end goal of MWBE engagement. So thinking about looking at the policies and practices that are in place, and then building in where technology can help to further them, and moving together hand in hand in both efforts is a way to be able to make real change on the ground. And I would say even in the first iteration or release of Passport, when we took our, we call it vendor disclosures online, it was a process that took a month for most businesses. It now takes just a matter of hours because it's online. We were somewhat constricted by policies that were in place, questions that need to be asked, questions that maybe don't make sense. And so had to think about how do you update that policy when you're moving into digital realm, and how do you, where you can, you do, and where you can't, how do you integrate that technology so that the policy is really one with the mode of accessibility, which is Passport for us.
And I'll just add to that, because I've seen the comments, disparity study a couple of times in there. That is a very concrete step. If your city is able to afford that, I mean, it's a large expense, but the disparity study absolutely becomes important for this work. It gives you the legal basis to have race conscious programs and things of that nature. The city of Birmingham just contracted 2 months ago with a consulting firm that's doing our disparity study. So we're taking that step as well. But I think for what Jennifer and I are speaking of, particularly are things that you can do now before you even get to that disparity study that gives you a good understanding of what's happening, so that by the time you do engage someone or a contractor for the disparity study, you have some sort of knowledge of where your inefficiencies lie, so that disparity study becomes even more effective. So I just wanted to point that out because I saw disparity study a couple of times in the chat.
Well, I just want to talk about a concept that I have a certification in, and that's contract compliance. A lot of times, no one ever does it. And then you find out that the vendors that were listed as subcontractors to a prime never got any of the work on the project. But we gave them a 30% MBE number or whatever. And they said, yeah, we'll make it, we'll do it. And then no one checks, and we pay off the contractor, and we think everybody's happy. And then the subs come back and say, well, I never got any work on that project, or I was supposed to do $100,000 and I only really wound up with $10,000. And then we're still looking at this prime as they completed 30% with MBEs, WBs, et cetera, and they didn't do anything. They didn't even come close to that number. So contract compliance is something that you can implement today in any city right now. And you would see, as I told the Obama administration many years ago, I said, you want a jobs creator, do contract compliance, because if you hold these contractors accountable for these MBEs and all this stuff, they will have to hire, the MBEs will have to hire new staff to do all the work that they're on these contracts for. That's a job creator.
Yeah, and that I'll just echo what you're saying, Carl. Before we went digital, there is a team and teams across actually all of our agencies that are doing just that. When you go digital, one of the benefits of that type of system is that compliance is something that can be built in. And then it's the people part is the strategy and the engagement, becoming city certified, et cetera. But the compliance piece, it's just built into the system. It's hard coded, so you can't get past a screen if you don't fill out, if the numbers don't add up. And same is true when you get down to your budgeting piece and your expenses. It all has to add up, or the system is going to block you. So technology can really be a useful tool in the compliance part as well, but it's not the only way to do it. You can start offline, as Carl was saying, with just a simple checklist to ensure that those numbers are there. And then it also requires, I'm sure you would, as you were saying, Carl, agree, the follow-up afterwards and monitoring and being conscious of what those goals are and ensuring that they're being satisfied.
Great. Well, we have so many questions, and if unfortunately our time is somehow already running out, it really does feel like this is just the beginning of a conversation, or rather we're entering the middle of a conversation that's already been going on. So we look forward to continuing to lift up the great thoughts and work that you guys have been doing. So I'd like to close out with just one last question. Perhaps Jennifer, you can take this one first, and that's our municipalities tend to have trouble with contract forecasting, largely due to decentralized and analog procurement systems. Can this panel speak to best practices to start that process within a city or county?
So I'm understanding the question around centralizing and creating more of a standard within the city, and a city of New York with its size has been able to do that. Again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but this is where technology can really help with that. When you have a central system that all purchasing is running through, you create a standard practice across all types of contracts, all types of vendors. That standardization creates predictability. It builds confidence for some smaller organizations or companies that have yet to do business with the city. They do it once, they know what to expect when they do it again. So a central platform for us has always been a grounder for our policy and our practice, and a way to manage across the whole city. And we use that principle actually across a number of our initiatives, trying to identify opportunities where there are broad engagements. How can we create a central unit to manage that broader engagement, to create the policy, to create the practice, to manage both of those things, to run the data that manages that. So we've done that offline in some of our initiatives, but certainly Passport and digital procurement is the key to being able to create a standard experience and a digital experience for purchasing in the city.
Great. And Elizabeth, do you have anything to add here? I know that you at Living Cities have done a lot of work in different sized cities with different procurement systems around the country.
Yeah, I mean, the example we always share is the city of Chicago, and their forecasting is done on like a quarterly basis, but you can't just start there. So within the cohort that Chicago is in, the city of Milwaukee was looking at how could they just begin putting together a citywide buying plan. And so yes, it's a lot of individual relationship work with every different department. It does help to have like city leadership on board, like a city manager saying, we're going to do this, creating internal systems and organizing with those colleagues and having champions in different departments knowing that. But it can be done. So just start collecting, and then using and having city leadership start to put attention and highlight and spotlight those who are sharing their buying plans and say like, hey, everybody look at Public Works, look what they're doing. Or everybody look at, and just start to like highlight the staff that are being intentional and also saying like, we do have these opportunities, and then if people will get on board, but it is a behavior change. So it's going to take some time, but it does require there to be like leadership at every level, making sure that and encouraging folks to take ownership and embracing it. Everybody has to understand the why. Why are we trying to have inclusive procurement? You started off saying it's about good procurement. It's about changing the lives and the quality of those lives in our cities and for our residents. And there are multiple benefits that Corietta and everybody here has been talking about. You know, when we're talking about the vendors who sell to us, we're talking about their families, we're talking about their employees, we're talking about the quality of life in our neighborhood. So if people don't understand the why, then it's harder for them to take ownership of that, and then harder for them to see like why they have to put together a buying plan and why it's necessary to go through all this data or spend the dollars to get a program together to make it more easy for others to see. But when they can, they change the game for everybody who's never been involved in procurement.
So well said, Elizabeth. I think that we're all just nodding along to that finish. So with that, I'm going to sadly close out our Q&A. There's so many great questions that we didn't have time for, but I'm glad that people were able to get some of their questions answered in the chat. So with that, Jennifer, it's on to you to send us on our way.
Thanks so much. I could take up the next 30 minutes just talking about some of the observations. One of the reasons I love working in these precincts of local government is that you realize that what may seem kind of wonky or technical really is about the human experience, how there's so much history embedded in procurement. So when Corietta said that there are vendors who don't want the MWBE certification because of the bad history there, right? That says a lot about where we have been. And, you know, there was a little bit of joke in the chat because of the beautiful way that the sun is pouring into Jennifer's room and to a certain extent into Elizabeth's room, that like the sun is shining on procurement. It's sunrise for a new day of procurement. But what I think has been most powerful about this conversation, and Elizabeth started with it and brought it back in her remarks, is we are coming upon a new understanding of accountability. Accountability used to be very compliance-based, punitive-based, don't you waste a dime of taxpayer money. And I think now we have a much more generative understanding of what accountability is. It's our money, and we want to spend it in a way that supports the kind of communities, the kind of families, the kind of neighborhoods and systems that we seek and that have been particularly important, and the importance of which has been particularly revealed to us during this chaotic and in many ways heartbreaking year. So we are so glad that you've joined us today. We hope that you will read the report, share the report, continue to engage with us on social media, and on Twitter, that's @OpenContracting, all one word, or @AspenUrbanInnov, INNOV. We ran into character counts. Just want to confirm with my OCP friends that we will be sharing not just the video, but also the chat, because the chat has been exceptionally rich and vibrant, as it always is when you get a bunch of procurement people together who have found their tribes. And my email and Keisha's email are now on the slide that you can see, and also going into the chat. So again, thank you. This has been a really uplifting, energizing, and informative conversation. Grateful to the panelists, grateful to our OCP partners, and grateful to all of you for joining us.